Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Novel. Today's lecture is on Thomas Keneally's Office of Innocence, another novel about a priest written by a layman. Now, this novel fascinated me. Whenever I read a layman's novel about a priest, I wonder if the layman has been a seminarian. Thomas Keneally was, and he was a seminarian at the same time I was a seminarian in the 1950s. The title of this novel gives you a hint of what it's about. It's about a very dedicated, perhaps overly idealistic young priest who was rather naive. Now, as I read the novel, I could recognize myself to some extent in it and a number of my classmates in it. When a man, just before a man is ordained a priest, it's a very solemn ceremony, and the bishop says to the men who are going to be ordained, "Are you ready?" And the answer is, "I am ready." Now, there is a sense in which you are ready, in the sense that you are freely doing this, no one's forcing you, it's something you want very much. But there's another sense in which you are not ready because nobody can be ready to fulfill this vocation. When I was in the seminary in the 1950s, and this is probably true of Thomas Keneally's experience, the primary value at the seminary was obedience. It was very much a training of the will, and there was a rule for everything. Okay? I mean, when you went out to play ball, you wore a cassock to the field. No talking above the basement, okay? Talking at meals only a couple of times a week. So this was the great value. And if you were discovered to be disobedient, like talking above the first floor or walking out to the football field without your cassock, this was a bad sign. So it was this, I don't mean to criticize anybody, but it was a rather narrow standard. If you were obedient, this meant you were a good seminarian. If you were disobedient, this meant you were a bad seminarian. I think life is a little bit more complicated than that. Now, what happens in this novel is the main character, Father Frank Dara, because of his idealism and because of him being naive, gets himself into trouble. One critic said this novel goes from melodrama to murder to mystery to a treatise to a theological treatise. So it's an excellent novel, and I would love to discuss this with some of my classmates and ask them, do you recognize yourself in this young priest? So in my education in the 1950s, the seminary, and once again I'm guessing it was something like this for Keneally, two things were lacking. We were not given any parochial experience at all. So the day before you were ordained, you were keeping rules about silence, and the day after you were ordained, you were dealing with the world's problems. And looking back, I think we perhaps could have been better prepared. So I think the lack of pastoral experience was a mistake. And about 5 years after I was ordained, that was all changed. That seminarians now have to, do some pastoral experience. And the other was, I know I was, and I suspect my classmates also were psychologically naive. We did not have one psychology course. So let me say this, we had one. It was called experimental psychology, in which we studied mice and cats and rats, okay? So we would dynamite with mice, but we weren't terribly prepared to deal with people who had emotional problems. And once again, about 5 years after I was ordained, that all changed. And I think most seminaries now have a resident, a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and emotional counseling is, available to everybody, okay? But what happens in the novel is, at least this is my reading, with the best intentions in the world, Father Frank Darrow gets involved in something. I think he's completely innocent, but it looks very bad. Here's what's happening. It's during the Second World War. It takes place in Sydney, Australia. The Japanese are moving towards Sydney, and some of the confessions that the priests hear are of the wives of the men who are in the service. So one wife is being unfaithful to her husband, and in order to help her, Father Dara suggests they meet outside the confessional, which is not the usual thing to do, but though it's not a horrendous error either. I mean, he's doing it because he thinks he may be able to help her. But what happens is, later in the novel, she is murdered, and that he is going to meet her for a discussion privately, okay, send it around a confession, causes scandal, and so on. So it's kind of his ecclesiastical downfall. And that's why the title, The Office of Innocence. Several times his pastor caricatures him as, he's great with confessions. His confession line is very long, but he's too idealistic. He doesn't know enough about human experience. Now, let me just focus for a second on maturity, emotional, psychological maturity. Very difficult, I think very difficult to define, and maybe very difficult to reach. I'm thinking of somebody I knew. When he was 20, he still seemed like he was 15. When he was 30, he seemed like he was about 19. When he was 60, he was still immature. How did that happen? I don't know how it happened. I know one time a father said to me, I find my teenage son immature. How can I, quote unquote, make him more mature? You know, all I could say is somehow his world has got to expand. Somehow his world has got to deepen. I spent 18 years teaching in a college seminary, dealing with seminarians all the time. And at St. John's University, where I've been teaching for over 30 years, I often have seminarians in my class. And they are very, you know, thank heaven, thank God, they are very idealistic young people. And you want to give, you can't make them mature, at least I don't think you can. But you want to give anything you have learned about being a priest, you want to give them any help you possibly can. So, you know, the American bishops are always having meetings about, you know, how should we train future priests? In terms of the sex abuse crisis, a lot of the training has been blamed for that. I don't know how honest that is, but certainly the sex abuse crisis revealed a lot of sick people were committing some terrible sins. Now, I think I announced this in another lecture, another one of these lectures. 3 months after I got ordained, I could not remember what I imagined being a priest would be like. Now that's kind of strange, I think. I remember this very vividly. I think my classmates, they seemed to have much clearer images than I did, but I didn't. But I knew this: 3 months after I was ordained, I knew that I had the greatest vocation in the world, that there was nothing like being a priest. And I don't want to sound pious, okay? But 60 years later, I would say the same thing. And I certainly don't mean to minimize people who have baptismal commitments or marital commitments. All I'm saying it is that a priest's life is just filled with possibilities for doing good. And let me add a footnote, so is everybody's. But because a priest has a certain image in the community, maybe he has more opportunities. People come to him and so on, okay? But I don't know how you can make a person mature. And I find the main character of this novel naive, but what happens to him, I think, is very unfortunate in the novel. He gets into serious trouble. My reading of the novel is Office of Innocence. He's innocent in two ways. Innocent in the sense of being naive, but he's innocent in the sense he hasn't done anything wrong. Anything he wanted to do was good. He was trying to help somebody, okay? One criticism of this novel is the villain is not sufficiently human. The murderer, the one who kills the wife, who's been seeking the priest's advice. Now, that was not my experience, but I think it's a good observation. What the critic did was he compared the villain in Office of Innocence to Pinky, the villain in Brighton Rock. Brighton Rock by Graham Greene was one of the first novels we discussed, okay? And Pinky is a 17-year-old murderer, but he's a Catholic. And so he's in the back of his mind is, you know, will he be saved? Will he be redeemed? And you may remember that there's a limerick going through his mind. Between the stirrup and the ground, he mercy sought and mercy found. So at the end of Brighton Rock, someone goes to confession and is wondering whether Pinky is saved or not. He's a murderer, okay? And the priest says a typical Graham Greene line, and I guess it could be said by Pope Francis. The priest says, neither you nor I understand the mercy of God. I think the line is the appalling strangeness of the mercy of God. You know, between the stirrup and the ground, he mercy sought and mercy found. Okay, so I agree completely that when you have a villain, you know, all actors want to play the villain. He's got to be a real villain. You can't make him an interesting idea. You know, if you're going to involve Satan, you've got to make Satan's take over the character real and believable. Yesterday in class at St. John's University, I showed the students the last scene of Angel with Dirty Faces. Those of you who haven't seen it, I strongly encourage you to watch that movie. Jimmy Cagney plays a gangster. He got the New York Critics Film Award back in 1940, I guess, 1939, 1940, which at that time was much more prestigious than the Academy Award, and he does a great job. But in the film, he's a gangster. He's killed many people. At one point, he makes the supreme sacrifice. The only thing he's got left is his reputation. And he says to his priest friend, you know, you want me to give this up. You want me to act like a coward when I go to the electric chair. That's all I've got left. What do you want from me? And the priest says, what I've always wanted, straighten yourself out with God. So I threw this question at the class. When he acts like a coward, does he straighten himself out with God? In other words, can that one act of giving up his reputation, surrendering his image as a tough guy, can that can that equal all the bad things he's done? Can it erase them? In other words, can he be saved by this act? Now, I'm guessing that all of you who are watching this show know what my answer will be. My answer will be yes. All he had, he gave. And we don't understand the appalling strangeness of the mercy of God, okay? Interestingly, the class was pretty evenly divided. A number of the people didn't think one act would do it, but I think it could, okay? Or my point is this. It's a very good novel. It speaks to me about what I was like as a young priest and what my classmates were like. I don't know how you make somebody mature. I think of marriage instructions. You know, we do our best pre-Cana to help people understand one another. It's not easy, and people, all of us are getting very we're getting images from our society that work against our faith commitments. So I can recommend this to you strongly, and let me recommend Thomas Keneally. We're probably going to do some more novels by him. He is a really skilled writer, and this is a book that will keep your attention from beginning to end.